In the early 1600s, merchants in Britain wanted to establish trade in the East Indies. They petitioned Queen Elizabeth and were granted permission to establish the East India Company. The British East India Company was started as a private company and then established trading posts in India. They hired Indian merchants to work for them. This picture shows an early trading post and fort made by the British East India Company. Over time, they expanded their trading posts across India and controlled Indian trade. The importing of Indian cotton and silk allowed the company, the British textile industry, and the British government to become very wealthy and powerful. Several others, including the Dutch and the Portuguese, were early competitors with Britain for Indian trade. The French realized that the British were establishing a trade monopoly with India, so they formed the French East India Company in the 1700s. Fighting between the two companies broke out in 1744, and the British drove France from India. Battle with the French and early battles with the Dutch and the Portuguese required the British East India Company to assemble its own military and administrative departments. Robert Clive, also known as the Clive of India, was a company military leader for the British India Company. He led the fight against Nawab, or Prince, of Bengal and won victory for the British India Company at the Battle of Plassey in 1757. Bengal sits on the east coast of India at the mouth of the Ganges River and was one of the richest provinces in India. The collapse of India's Mughal Empire in the 1700s allowed Britain to take over the entire nation from its power base in Bengal. 1857, the Indian military, called the Sepoys, and the Indian merchants who worked for the East India Company rebelled against Britain. The Indian Mutiny lasted until 1858. The British won mainly because of its impressive cavalry and harsh punishment against the Indians. This victory made British rule more powerful in India. After the war, the British government passed the Government of India Act 1858, which transferred the administrative rule of India from the East India Trading Company to the British government. The rule of India by the British government was called the time of the British Raj. The word Raj means reign in Hindi. The British Raj lasted between 1858 and 1947. This slide shows a vintage British Raj flag. Here we see the size of the area of British rule across India and the region that at the time of the British Raj.
When the British Empire took over in 1858 after the Indian Mutiny, the British government took away many rights from Indian citizens. Indians generally had no rights and no voice in their own rule. Indian farmers did not have the right to grow whatever crop they wanted. In fact, the British government forced farmers in certain regions to grow certain crops. Then all the farmers in that region grew the same crop, their demand went down and the selling price dropped enormously. The people of India were also denied the right to produce their own salt, a very profitable good. Although the Indians had so few rights, they were still responsible for providing the British with many goods and other services. The Indians were responsible for paying taxes that supported the British government. The Indians also provided the British with a well-standing army without the cost of British taxpayers. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was born on October 2, 1869 in Porbandar, India. His parents were both deeply religious, and he was raised as a Hindu. He was taught not to hurt any living thing, and he was against violence. At the age of 19, Mohandas left home to study law in London at the Inner Temple. He became a lawyer and was assigned to work in South Africa. There he saw very harsh racial discrimination against Indians, and when this happened to him, he resisted it. He led a campaign of civil disobedience in South Africa that lasted for 8 years. Indian miners went on strike. At the end of the peaceful protest, thousands of citizens were thrown in jail, including Gandhi. When Gandhi returned to India in 1914, many Indians knew of his protests in South Africa, and they welcomed him, calling him a hero for what he had done. Gandhi then led many protests and boycotts against the British in India. They boycotted British-produced tea, foods, and clothes. Indians all across the country were encouraged to make their own clothes. When the Indians did not buy British goods, the British made very small profits. The British government noticed the boycotts and then became angry. When Gandhi protested, they sentenced him to jail for no reason. When he was released, he kept on protesting. He was very determined to win independence for India.
In 1885, the Indian National Congress was formed. The INC, as it was called, was the first organized political opposition to the British Raj. The INC had several factions based on religion and whether protest against the British should be violent or peaceful. Gandhi was elected the president of the INC in 1924 and built the organization into a powerful voice for both Hindus and Muslims against the British.
On March 12, 1930, Gandhi set out on one of his most famous protests, the Salt March. Gandhi's goal was to walk 240 miles to Dandi on the Gujarat coast. Throughout this march, civilians joined Gandhi on their protests of the salt tax. By the time Gandhi arrived at the coast on April 6, they were thousands strong. This protest was soon worldwide. The thousands of Indians then started to produce their own salt, and with that they had broken the law. This particular protest was very important because it was noticed worldwide. People then began to follow Gandhi's movements around the globe.
As early as 1917, Britain had begun to discuss limited rule for Indian nationals. As a result of the Government of India Act 1919, a few reforms were made giving India a measure of self-government. Despite these reforms, the British controlled all central government. Until 1935, a series of commissions were held to determine if India was ready for more concessions/reforms. Here we see Gandhi at a commission meeting in London in 1930. As a result of these meetings and the protests led by Gandhi and the INC, the Government of India Act 1935 was passed and several major reforms were made. The British granted large measure of autonomy to the provinces of British India, which ended the direct British rule established by the Government of India Act 1990.
The two predominant religions in India were Hindi and Muslim. At the end of the British Raj, India was fragmented into both Muslim and Hindi regions. In August 1947, the British government partitioned the Republic of India into the Dominion of Pakistan and the Union of India. India and Pakistan were created mainly by the division of the Hindi and Muslim population. A region between Pakistan and India that has long been in dispute is Kashmir. Kashmir was bought during the British Raj by Maharaja Gulab Singh. Singh was Hindi, but Kashmir's population was mainly Muslim. During partition, Singh didn't want this region to go to Pakistan, so the Kashmir region was not partitioned to either Pakistan or India by the British government. Ever since partition, Pakistan and India have had government and military disputes over control of this region and its resources. Gandhi's peaceful protests in India inspired many other world leaders to gain rights through nonviolent movements.